Millionaire receives a hug by mistake from a poor girl and discovers true love. Before watching the video, please leave a like to support our channel. It was just another Thursday morning at the bustling JFK airport. But for Grace Delaney, it felt like the most important day of her life. The air was thick with noise, rolling suitcases, flight announcements, hurried footsteps. But her heart beat louder than any of it. Her brother Jacob was finally coming home after 8 long months overseas. Grace hadn't seen him since the day he left for deployment. She had counted every day, saved every penny to afford the train ride to New York, and now she was here, tiptoeing in worn sneakers, stretching her neck above a wall of strangers in suitcases. Then she saw him, a tall silhouette, broad shoulders, dark hair, walking toward the arrival gate with that familiar gait. Her heart leapt. It had to be Jacob. Without a second thought, Grace darted forward, weaving through the crowd with the grace of someone who didn't care how silly she looked. She didn't care about personal space or caution. Her eyes were blurry with tears. She only knew one thing. Her brother was back. And then she threw her arms around him. "I missed you so much," she whispered, her voice trembling, burying her face against his chest. But something was different. The hug didn't feel right. This man's chest was solid, sculpted even. Jacob was strong, but not like this. And then there was the scent. Expensive cologne, woody and crisp, with an undertone of something exotic and unfamiliar. Jacob never wore anything like that. Slowly, Grace pulled back and looked up. Her heart stopped. The man she had just hugged was not her brother. He was a stranger, and not just any stranger. He wore a perfectly cut navy blue suit, the kind you'd only see in glossy magazines or behind velvet ropes at private galas. His hair was neatly swept back, and his gray eyes, cool as winter rain, were fixed on her with a mix of amusement and intrigue. For one unbearable second, neither of them said a word. Then Grace stumbled back, her cheeks flaming. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you were someone else. My brother." I didn't get a good look. Oh no. She couldn't even finish her sentence as her words twisted into frantic, breathless stammering. The man raised a calm brow, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "Well," he said in a smooth, unhurried tone, "that's one way to start the day." Grace wanted to disappear. She practically sprinted toward the exit, her face still burning with embarrassment. She muttered apologies to anyone who brushed against her, dodged a woman pushing a stroller, and ducked into the nearest bathroom just to catch her breath. Her heart thudded in her ears as she leaned over the sink. "What did you just do, Grace?" she whispered to herself. One hug, one mistaken hug, one terribly awkward, deeply mortifying hug that she'd probably never live down. But the moment she looked up at her reflection in the mirror, she caught herself smiling, just barely. There had been something in the man's eyes, not anger, not judgment, but something else. Curiosity. Grace didn't expect to ever see him again. He was probably on some important business trip, headed to a city she couldn't afford to dream of. People like that didn't stay in her world. Her life was all bus rides, early shifts, hand-me-downs, and hope. She worked at a little airport cafe tucked between gates 18 and 22, a quiet corner where flight delays and red-eyed travelers found comfort in coffee that was never quite hot enough. 3 days later, she was refilling sugar containers when a shadow fell across the counter. She looked up, ready to deliver her practiced, "Welcome to Sky Bean Cafe. What can I get you today?" speech. But the words caught in her throat. It was him, the man from the airport, the mistake, and he was smiling like they were old friends. "Still hugging strangers?" he asked gently, sliding into a seat near the window. Grace nearly dropped the sugar jar. "You," she breathed, blinking in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He leaned on the counter with effortless grace. "I had a few hours before my next flight. Thought I'd try my luck with the coffee." "This is a very large airport," Grace replied, arms crossed, recovering fast. "You could have chosen a dozen cafes." "True," he said, "but none of them had you." Grace felt a flutter in her chest, one she didn't want to acknowledge, not yet. "Well, unless you're here for another accidental hug, this one's takeout only," she said with a raised brow, trying to hide the smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. He chuckled, low, warm, and smooth. How about a coffee then? Surprise me. She hesitated. Your name? He tapped the counter twice as if it were a secret code. Nathan Blackwell. Grace froze. She had heard that name before. She couldn't remember where, but the way he said it, the way it echoed in her mind, it wasn't ordinary. And neither was he. Still, she nodded. One surprise coffee coming right up. Nathan. As she moved around the cafe, Grace could feel his eyes following her, not in a creepy way, but like he was trying to memorize her. And something told her this wasn't going to be the last time she saw him. The next day, Grace told herself she was imagining things. She wore the same navy apron, clocked in at 5:55 a.m., and opened the cafe like she always did, wiping down counters, stacking pastries behind the glass, brewing the first bitter pot of coffee for the morning rush. Just another shift. Just another day. But by 6:30 a.m., there he was again. Nathan Blackwell, same tailored coat, same silver cufflinks, same calm, unreadable smile. Good morning, Biao, he said, casually flipping through the newspaper as if this was just routine. Grace blinked. Did your flight never take off? No, it did, he replied. I canceled it. She stared. Why? He folded the paper neatly. Because I wasn't done talking to you. Grace's breath caught. This man, this stranger in a suit worth more than her entire month's rent, was sitting at her cafe table like he had nowhere better to be. I don't get it, she said, setting a clean cup in front of him. You're clearly someone important. I am, he said with no arrogance in his tone. Then what are you doing here with me? Nathan tilted his head, those steel gray eyes narrowing with quiet intensity. Because you're not like the rest. Grace scoffed, half laughing. You barely know me. But I'd like to. There was a sincerity in his voice that caught her off guard. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't teasing. It was like he truly meant it. Grace stepped back, arms crossed. Is this some kind of rich guy game? You show up at a poor girl's job, act charming, then disappear when it gets boring? Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. If I wanted to play games, I'd be on a golf course, not ordering coffee from you. There was a pause. He stood and pulled something from his coat. A business card. Clean, matte black with silver letters. Nathaniel Blackwell, CEO, Blackwell Holdings Private Contact. Redacted. Grace didn't touch it. Why are you showing me this? She asked, more wary now than impressed. Because I'm not hiding who I am, he said, gently placing the card on the counter. I want you to know everything from the start. Grace glanced at it, then back at him. Well, Mr. Blackwell, I still don't know what you want from me. Nathan smiled softly. Your time, and maybe eventually, your trust. He turned to leave but paused in the doorway. I'll be back tomorrow, same time. And he was. The days that followed blurred together, but one thing remained constant. Nathan always showed up. Sometimes he ordered the house special. Other times he asked for something new. Once he sat in silence for an hour, just watching the world go by through the cafe window, sipping his coffee like it was his first. But no matter what, he always asked Grace something about herself. Not shallow questions, real ones. What book made you cry the hardest? What was your childhood dream? What's the one thing you've never told anyone? Grace answered cautiously at first, unsure of his intentions. But over time, the walls began to fall. Not all at once, but little by little, like the thawing of winter ice. One afternoon, after a particularly rough shift, Grace dropped into the chair across from him, tired and emotionally spent. Nathan didn't ask what was wrong. He just said, talk to me. And for some reason, she did. About her brother Liam, about the bills, the eviction notice they narrowly escaped last winter. The 2 jobs she juggled. The dreams she stuffed into drawers to make room for responsibility. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He listened. And when she finally looked up at him, embarrassed by how much she'd said, he smiled, not out of pity, but pride. You're stronger than you think, he said softly. Grace didn't respond, but something shifted that day. And the next morning she found a to-go cup waiting for her at the counter, steam rising gently, with her name written in foam. Just one word. Grace. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Grace noticed Liam, her 17-year-old brother, was sleeping more than usual. He brushed it off, saying school was exhausting. Then came the headaches, the pale color in his cheeks, and the occasional wince when he stood up too fast. She chalked it up to growing pains, stress, a bad diet. But deep down, Grace knew something wasn't right. Their apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up in a neighborhood where sirens were more common than sunshine, didn't leave much room for denial. Liam's coughs echoed off the peeling wallpaper. The medicine Grace bought from the drugstore helped for a day, then nothing. He was growing weaker, thinner. His smile, the one that used to light up the whole room, was fading. Still, she kept showing up to work, smiling, brewing coffee, cleaning tables, and Nathan kept showing up too. She could feel his gaze linger longer these days, like he could sense something wasn't being said. But Grace didn't tell him. She couldn't. He was kind, gentle, rich beyond imagining. But he wasn't hers. Not really. Not in the way she needed right now. Besides, Grace had never asked anyone for help before. She wasn't about to start now. One evening, after a long shift, she came home to find Liam curled up on the couch, trembling. "Liam," she whispered, rushing to his side. "What's wrong?" I don't feel right, Gracie," he muttered, voice barely audible. "My stomach, it hurts bad, and I'm cold." His skin was clammy, his forehead burned. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by his side, holding his hand and Googling symptoms on a cracked phone with 7% battery. At dawn, she made a decision. Hospital. It was supposed to be just a precaution. But after 3 hours in the emergency room and a dozen tests, the doctor came into the waiting room with the clipboard and a tight expression. "Miss Delaney, your brother has a serious kidney condition. He's going to need treatment. Soon." Grace felt her world tilt. "What kind of treatment?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Ongoing dialysis, possibly surgery. We'll need to run more diagnostics." "And the cost?" The doctor hesitated. When he told her, Grace didn't cry. She nodded, thanked him, then walked into the hallway and sat on the floor. Silent, staring at her hands. The numbers didn't make sense. Rent, utilities, groceries, Liam's medication. Now this? Even with both her jobs, even if she worked until her bones broke, it wouldn't be enough. She tried to breathe, tried to think, tried not to panic. The next morning, Nathan walked into the cafe at exactly 7:12 a.m. 7:12 a.m., as usual. But Grace wasn't behind the counter. She was seated in the far corner, staring out the window, pale, exhausted, somewhere else entirely. He walked over and sat across from her. "You look like someone stole your smile," he said gently. Grace turned to him, eyes dull. "Rough night. Want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "No, but thanks for asking." Nathan studied her for a moment. He knew enough to sense when someone was unraveling. He had seen it in boardrooms, in business partners, in people trying too hard to pretend everything was okay. Now he saw it in Grace. "I could help, you know," he said quietly. She tensed. "With whatever it is," he added. "No," she said too quickly, too harshly. "I don't need your money, Nathan." His expression didn't change. "I didn't offer money. I offered help." Grace looked away. "Same thing in your world, isn't it?" "No," he replied. "Not when it comes to you." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the espresso machine buzzing faintly in the background. Then Grace stood. "I appreciate you coming in, but I need to get back to work." She walked away before he could answer, and Nathan sat alone at the table, his coffee untouched, watching the woman he couldn't stop thinking about slip further behind a wall he didn't know how to break through. But he wasn't giving up. Not yet. Nathan wasn't the kind of man who liked being kept in the dark. But with Grace, he didn't mind waiting. He just wished she didn't look so tired doing it. For days, he watched the light in her eyes dim. Her movements slowed. Her laughter, once soft and effortless, vanished. Even the way she greeted him each morning had changed. It was like she was carrying the weight of something far too heavy for one person to bear. And so he did what any man with resources and a growing sense of care would do. He made a few calls, not invasive ones, just careful questions, discreet, respectful. Within hours, he had answers he wasn't ready for. Liam Delaney, 17, hospitalized, stage 3 kidney failure, Grace was listed as his emergency contact and financial guarantor. The treatment costs were astronomical. Nathan stood at the window of his penthouse that night, the city glittering beneath him. His phone still in his hand, screen dark. So that's why she looked so broken. And still, she had said nothing. Asked for nothing. He admired that. But he couldn't let it go on. The next morning, Grace was in the cafe early, wiping down tables before the doors even opened. The air smelled like cinnamon and burnt coffee. At 6:59, Nathan walked in. Grace didn't look up right away. "Nathan," she said without turning, "it's not even 7. "I know." He waited. She finally looked at him. "You're early." "You're hurting." She froze. "I know about Liam," he said gently, "and I know he's in the hospital." The silence was deafening. Grace felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. "How?" "I asked," he said simply, "because I care." Grace's throat tightened. "You had no right." "Maybe not," he said, "but I couldn't watch you fall apart and do nothing." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I'm fine." "No, Grace, you're not." She turned her back to him, arms folded tightly. "I'm not a charity case, Nathan." "I never said you were." "Then stop trying to fix everything." "I'm not trying to fix everything," he said, voice lower now. "I'm trying to help the woman I—" He paused. "The woman I can't stop thinking about." Grace swallowed hard. Nathan stepped closer. "Let me help you, not with money, not with handouts." She turned around, eyes red. "Then what are you offering?" He met her gaze without flinching. "A deal." She didn't answer right away. The next morning, she stood outside his building, glass and steel and polished marble rising into the clouds. The security guard at the front desk looked skeptical until she said the name, Nathan Blackwell. She was escorted up. When the elevator doors opened to his penthouse, Nathan was already waiting, hands in his pockets, a soft look in his eyes. "Come in." The apartment was breathtaking. Clean lines, open space, and art on the walls that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. "This is surreal," she muttered, stepping inside. He nodded. "I imagine it is." "So," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "The deal?" Nathan walked to the kitchen and set a small envelope on the counter. Inside was a simple piece of paper with a number, exactly what Liam's hospital had quoted for his treatment. Grace didn't touch it. "This isn't a gift," he said. "It's a contract." She looked up sharply. "You cook for me, 3 meals a day, for 7 days, here, in this apartment. I pay you for your time, that's all." She blinked. "You want me to cook?" He shrugged. "You mentioned once that you wanted to go to culinary school. Thought I'd give you a kitchen to practice in." Grace stared at him. This man, this impossible, generous, maddening man. "You're serious?" Nathan nodded. "Dead serious." She hesitated. Pride battled with desperation. She hated the idea of needing anyone, but she loved her brother more than her pride. Finally, she whispered, "Deal." Nathan's smile was quiet. "Then we'll start tomorrow." Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed she shared with worry, her eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. The deal she had made repeated in her mind like an unfinished lullaby. 7 days, 3 meals a day, and him. She wasn't scared of the cooking, that part was easy. She'd been preparing meals since she was 9. But cooking in his apartment, for him, while walking a tightrope of boundaries and unspoken feelings, that was a different recipe entirely. At precisely 7 a.m., Grace stood in front of the towering building once more, this time with a cloth bag full of recipes scribbled on the backs of receipts and old napkins. The doorman nodded, already briefed. She rode the elevator in silence, heart pounding. When the doors opened, Nathan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee in hand. "You're early," he said, surprised. "So are you," he smirked. "Couldn't sleep." "Same." They stood there for a moment in the kitchen, surrounded by state-of-the-art appliances she didn't even know how to pronounce. Grace finally moved toward the counter, unpacking a few ingredients. "Any preferences?" she asked. Nathan leaned on the island, watching her with unreadable eyes. "Surprise me." The first few days followed a rhythm neither of them had expected. Grace cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the kitchen that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. Nathan worked in his home office most of the day, but always appeared before each meal, as if drawn by an invisible thread. At first, their conversations were light, surface level, music, food, travel. But slowly, without meaning to, deeper things crept in. One afternoon, as Grace kneaded dough for garlic flatbread, Nathan walked in holding an old photo. It was a picture of a small boy with wide eyes and messy curls standing beside a grand piano. "Is that you?" she asked. He nodded. "My mother's dream was for me to become a concert pianist. I hated it. Did you tell her?" "No," he said softly. "She died before I could." Grace paused, her hands covered in flour. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but the sadness in his eyes didn't. Later that evening, as she served grilled salmon over lemon risotto, he asked, "Do you ever wish you'd walked away from everything?" Grace didn't answer at first. "I used to wish that," she said finally, "back when I thought it was weakness to stay. But now I think maybe staying is a kind of strength, too." Nathan looked at her as if he'd never really seen her until that moment. By day 5, everything had changed. Grace no longer knocked when she arrived. Nathan had started helping with prep, badly. He chopped vegetables like he was signing contracts, precise, slow, and full of suspicion. She teased him mercilessly. He pretended to be offended. They laughed. A lot. But there were quiet moments too. Moments when he'd look at her from across the kitchen, and she could feel the weight of his gaze settle on her skin like warm sunlight. Moments when she'd catch herself wishing the contract didn't end in 2 days. One night, while preparing dessert, she asked the question that had been burning in her for days. "Why me, Nathan?" He looked up from his seat at the counter. "What do you mean?" "You could have hired a chef, or just donated the money. Why this? Why me in your kitchen? Every day?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because when you hugged me that day at the airport, something changed." Grace's heart fluttered. "I don't know what it was," he continued, "but since then I haven't wanted to be anywhere else." The room went still. Grace looked down at the cutting board, at the strawberries she'd been slicing. Her hands trembled just slightly. "Don't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because you don't know me." "Not really." He stood and crossed the room slowly. "Then let me." Grace turned to face him, her breath caught in her throat. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, saw the hospital name flash across the screen, and her world tilted again. Grace didn't speak for a full minute. She just stared at the screen as the name of the hospital glowed like a warning in her hand. Then slowly she pressed the phone to her ear, dread tightening around her like a vice. "Miss Delaney?" the nurse said on the other end, her voice calm, but not casual. "Yes," Grace whispered. "There's been a complication with your brother's condition. He experienced a sudden drop in blood pressure. The doctor stabilized him, but they'd like to talk with you about the next steps as soon as possible." Grace swallowed hard. "I'll be there," she managed, voice shaking. She hung up. Nathan stood just a few feet away, watching her closely. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. "Come on," he said, already grabbing his keys. "I'm taking you." Grace wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need him, that she could do it on her own. But this time she didn't. This time she simply nodded. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and sadness. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Nurses whispered urgently behind computer stations. Machines beeped in slow, steady rhythms, keeping time with silent prayers. Grace sat in the waiting room, her fingers laced so tightly they were turning white. Nathan sat beside her, hands on his knees, jaw clenched. When the doctor approached, Grace stood so fast her chair screeched backward. "The infection we mentioned earlier has spread faster than we expected," the doctor said, his voice clinical, measured. "We need to perform a procedure tonight. It's not the transplant yet, but it's critical. Without it, he might not make it through the week." Grace's heart stopped. "The cost?" she asked. The doctor hesitated. Then he said the number. It was more than she could fathom, more than she could make in 2 years of work. Grace backed up a step. I can't." Nathan stood. "Yes," he said, "she can." The doctor turned to him. "And you are?" "I'll take care of it," Nathan replied, slipping his card into the man's hand. "Schedule the procedure. Now." The doctor nodded and walked away. Grace turned to Nathan, her voice rising. "You had no right." "I had every right," he snapped, surprising her. "You think I'm doing this because I pity you? Because I want to throw money at a problem? I didn't ask you to. No, you didn't, he said softer now. And that's exactly why I'm doing it. She blinked, tears rising. Nathan stepped closer. I care about Liam because he matters to you. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to save yours. Her resolve crumbled, and when she collapsed into his chest, sobbing, he wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. No words, no promises, just presence, just warmth. That night, Liam underwent surgery. Grace sat in the hallway outside the OR, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. Nathan never left her side. Not once. He didn't speak. He didn't try to make it better. He just stayed. And that, more than anything, made her feel like maybe she wasn't so alone after all. When the doctor finally returned and said the procedure had gone well, that Liam was stable, Grace broke down again. Relief poured from her in silent sobs. She didn't have the strength to stop. Nathan placed a hand on her back, just between her shoulders. And for the first time since her parents died, she leaned on someone without guilt. The following days were a blur. Grace moved between hospital and apartment like a ghost, barely sleeping. Nathan arranged for her to take time off work. He paid the rent. He stocked her fridge. He even sat with Liam when she needed a moment to breathe. And he asked for nothing in return. One evening, after watching Liam sleep, Grace walked out to the hospital garden. Nathan was waiting there, sitting on a bench under the soft glow of string lights the staff had hung for the holidays. She sat beside him. You should have let me figure it out, she said quietly. He didn't argue. I'm used to carrying things alone. I know. Grace looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, she didn't see the billionaire. She saw the man who bought her brother time, the man who never flinched when she fell apart. Why are you really doing all this? She whispered. Nathan turned to her. Because I don't want to imagine a world where you're hurting and I do nothing. Grace's breath caught in her chest, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and took his hand. Warm, steady, safe. The days that followed felt like borrowed time, gentler, quieter. Liam was recovering steadily, the color returning to his cheeks, his voice stronger every day. Grace still came to the hospital every morning, but now she smiled more often. Not wide, carefree smiles, but the kind that sneak out when your heart is healing. Nathan remained close. Always. They talked more in those long evenings in the hospital garden than most people do in years. He told her about his mother's death, about growing up with his father who had more ambition than affection, about inheriting a billion-dollar company when he was barely 25 and losing more of himself every year to boardrooms and briefcases. Grace shared stories about raising Liam after their parents died, about quitting school to work double shifts, about nights she'd cried into a pillow so he wouldn't hear. One night, she told him about her favorite dream, opening a cafe of her own someday, with real wood tables, homemade muffins, a tiny chalkboard menu. Nathan listened like every word mattered, and when she asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you weren't rich?" he answered, "Only when I'm with you." Their first kiss came unexpectedly. It was just after Liam's discharge. Grace and Nathan had walked him back to the apartment, helped him into bed, laughed over a ridiculous cooking show they half-watched, and shared takeout on the floor. Then Grace stood to go wash the dishes, and Nathan followed her into the kitchen. "I'll dry," he offered. She handed him a plate, their fingers brushed, and she looked up, he looked down. The kiss wasn't perfect, it was tentative, trembling. A question more than a statement, but when it ended, neither of them moved away. "I should be terrified," Grace whispered. "You are," Nathan said, brushing a thumb against her cheek, "but that's okay." And it was, for a while, until the past showed up. Grace didn't even realize what she was hearing when she overheard the conversation at the market. Two women at the produce stand talking about a string of business closures from a few years back. Names she barely recognized, until one hit her like a stone to the chest. Sunridge Cafe, her parents' restaurant, the one they'd poured their lives into, the one that closed so suddenly, the one that left them bankrupt, struggling, broken. She stepped closer. "I heard it was part of a corporate sweep," one woman said. "Blackwell Holdings, wasn't it?" The other nodded. "Yep, swallowed up half the block." Guess it was just business. Grace stood frozen, her blood roaring in her ears. Blackwell, Nathan's company. She didn't cry on the train ride home. She didn't scream or run or collapse. She just unraveled quietly. By the time she reached Nathan's apartment, his place, the one that had started to feel dangerously close to home, he greeted her at the door with a soft smile, the kind that used to make her melt. But tonight it meant nothing. You knew, she said. Nathan's smile faded. Grace, you knew your company ruined my family's life, and you said nothing. He didn't deny it. I didn't know when we met, he said carefully. I found out later after I cared. After you were already what? Involved? Complicit? No, in love. Grace flinched. Nathan stepped closer. Grace, listen to me. She backed away. You had days to tell me. Weeks. You stood beside me while I cried over that place. You let me talk about my family's dreams like you weren't the man who helped take them away. I wasn't the one who made that deal. But you wear the name. And that hurt most of all. She didn't remember how she got outside. The wind was sharp, the sky too quiet, and in her chest a silence even deeper, like something had been torn loose. She didn't know if she could forgive him, and she didn't know if she wanted to. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the silence of her apartment, staring at the ceiling while Liam slept peacefully in the next room, completely unaware that her world had shifted under her feet. How could something that had felt so right suddenly feel like a lie? Every memory with Nathan now felt stained by the truth. His laughter, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that ever made sense. All of it now lived under a shadow. And yet, she couldn't hate him. That was the worst part. She had given him more of herself than she ever had with anyone. And maybe that's what made the betrayal feel so sharp. Because somewhere along the line, she had started to believe he was safe, that he was hers. Nathan didn't try to call that night. He didn't text. He didn't show up at the cafe. He gave her space, and for some reason that hurt too. But the next day, just before closing time, Grace heard the cafe door chime behind her. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. His footsteps were quiet. Careful. Can we talk? He asked, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She turned slowly, arms crossed over her chest. Nathan didn't step closer. He reached into his coat pocket and held out an envelope. I won't stay, he said. I just want you to read this. That's all. Grace hesitated, but then she took it, and Nathan walked out without another word. It took her 2 hours to open the envelope. Inside was a single document, a property deed. Her eyes widened as she read the name, Sunridge Cafe. Underneath, in neat black ink, it listed the new owner, Grace Delaney. There was a second sheet, a note in Nathan's handwriting. Grace, I can't undo what my company did. I can't erase your family's pain, but I can try, just try, to give you back what was taken. You once told me this place was the heart of your childhood, the dream your parents built, the place you were supposed to inherit before the world got in the way. Now it's yours again. No contracts, no repayment, no strings. I didn't do this to fix anything. I did it because I love you. And because I finally understand what it means to let someone go, when they no longer feel safe in your arms. If this is goodbye, I'll respect it. But if you ever find your way back to me, I'll still be exactly where you left me. Nathan. Grace didn't cry. Not at first. She simply sat there in silence, staring at the papers in her hand. Proof that love wasn't always perfect, but it could still be real. Proof that some people, when they say they care, actually mean it. The next morning, Grace stood in front of the old Sunridge Cafe building. Dusty windows, faded brick, but still standing. She slipped the key into the door, and something opened, not just in the lock, but in her chest. She stepped inside, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was mourning something lost. She felt like she was walking into something waiting for her, waiting for a new beginning, and maybe for a second chance. Nathan sat alone in his office that morning, staring out over the skyline. He had built a life from marble and ambition, learned how to close deals with silence, how to rise above emotions and never look back. But Grace had changed all of that. She was the one thing he hadn't been able to calculate. He had fallen for her not because she was easy to impress, but because she wasn't. Because she challenged him, saw past the suit, called out the truth without hesitation, and now she was gone. He hadn't expected her to forgive him, but giving her back the cafe had been the only thing he knew how to do. To offer something real, something that meant something to her, not him. He hadn't heard from her since. Until the elevator dinged. Nathan turned toward the sound instinctively. The door to his private office creaked open slowly, and there she was. Grace, wind in her hair, a paper cup of coffee in one hand, a look in her eyes he couldn't quite read. She stepped in without speaking, walked across the polished floor, placed the cup on his desk, then crossed her arms. "I read your note," she said. Nathan stood, carefully. "I meant every word." She nodded. "I know." A beat of silence passed between them. "I hated you," she whispered. "For a moment. For the lie you didn't tell. For the thing you didn't do." Nathan said nothing, "But I never stopped." Her voice caught. "I never stopped wanting you to be the one who came after me." Nathan's expression softened. "And I did." "I know," she said again, voice trembling. She walked to the window, staring out at the city. "Do you know what it felt like, unlocking that door?" she asked quietly. Nathan shook his head, like breathing again. He exhaled slowly. "I don't need you to save me, Nathan," she said, turning back to him. "But I want you beside me." His voice cracked. "That's all I've wanted." She stepped forward. "This isn't about the cafe," she said, "or the money, or what your company did. It's about us, about starting something that's honest and real. Not perfect, not easy, but worth it," Nathan finished. She looked at him and nodded. Then she said the one word that changed everything. "Stay." Nathan closed the space between them in two strides. This time, the kiss wasn't hesitant. It wasn't filled with questions. It was an answer, a beginning. And when Grace pulled back, her hands still tangled in the fabric of his shirt, she whispered, "We've got a lot of work to do." Nathan smiled. "So let's get started." Grace had never held a hammer in one hand and a billionaire's palm in the other. But somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The cafe, once abandoned and forgotten, was alive again. Not just with paint and repairs, but with vision. Her vision. The front windows were washed and clear now, letting sunlight flood the space. The cracked linoleum had been ripped up, the tables replaced with warm wooden ones Nathan had personally helped pick out from a small workshop upstate. The air smelled of fresh coffee beans and sawdust, of fresh beginnings and second chances. And through it all, Nathan was there, every day. He wore less suits and more flannel, rolled up sleeves, paint smudges on his forearm. Grace once caught him reading a how to install a light fixture guide, at 2 a.m. with a furrowed brow and a cup of her weak tea. He wasn't good at any of it, but he was trying, not because he needed to, because he wanted to. They disagreed sometimes about decor, about the color of the mugs, even about where the pastry display should go. "You have billionaire opinions," Grace teased one day, standing with her hands on her hips. "And you have cafe owner instincts," he countered, pointing toward her hand-drawn floor plan. "I defer to the boss." She smirked. "I'll have that in writing, please." He raised a brow. "I'll draft a contract." She threw a napkin at him, and when she walked past, he caught her wrist gently and kissed her cheek, just under her ear. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. Her smile wobbled. "I'm proud of us." But not everyone felt the same. Rumors swirled. The media hadn't forgotten about the billionaire and the waitress. Photos surfaced. Headlines speculated. Was she a gold digger? Was he playing house? Nathan tried to shield her, even hired a PR team to manage the noise. But Grace heard the whispers, saw the way some customers stared when they walked past the nearly finished cafe windows, read the comments beneath the articles she tried not to open. One night, after a long day of construction and coffee stains, she sat on the cafe steps, chin on her knees. Nathan found her there. "They don't know me," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but I do." She looked up at him. "And I love what I know." 1 week before opening day, the health inspector made a surprise visit. Grace panicked when she realized they were short one fire extinguisher and hadn't labeled the kitchen bins yet. Nathan stayed calm. He smiled at the inspector, offered him the best trial run coffee Grace had made, and promised that everything would be corrected by morning. When the man left, Nathan turned to her. "We'll fix it, just a hiccup." Grace sighed. "I just wanted everything to be perfect." "It is perfect," he said, brushing a smudge of flour from her cheek, "because it's yours." She leaned into him, forehead to his chest, and for a while they just stood like that, two hearts beating in sync inside a half-painted dream. Opening day was a breath Grace hadn't taken in years. They flipped the sign at exactly 8 a.m. The first customer was Liam, walking stronger, smiling wide, wearing a proud little brother pin Grace had no idea he'd made. The second customer was an elderly woman who used to visit the cafe back when Grace's parents owned it. She cried when she saw the newly painted sign over the counter. Sunridge Cafe, Est Reborn. The third customer, a man in a suit holding a paper. A reporter. Grace hesitated, but Nathan stepped forward, put an arm around her shoulders and said, "She built this. Tell that story." And the man did. That night, the cafe closed at 6. Grace and Nathan danced in the kitchen, barefoot on clean tile floors, swaying to an old jazz tune playing from the radio. The ovens cooled, the lights dimmed, and the space that once held so much history now echoed with laughter and soft footsteps. "You know," she murmured, resting her head against his chest, "this started with a hug that wasn't meant for you." Nathan smiled, kissing her hair. But maybe it was. The cafe had been open for exactly 39 days. Grace had memorized the way the bell above the door jingled. She knew which customers liked their coffee scalding and which ones asked for decaf, but always smirked when she gave them the real thing. She knew how the sun fell through the windows at 10:15, warming table 6, and how Nathan always sat at table 5 because it gave him the best view of her. Life had become a rhythm again, not survival, not chaos, but living, breathing, dreaming, and loving. Nathan was still her partner in business, but more importantly, he was her partner in everything else. He was the one who made her laugh when orders got mixed up, the one who held her waist in the middle of the kitchen when no one was looking, the one who brought her late-night tea and whispered, "You're doing it. You made this happen." She had never known love could be this steady. And then, one quiet Thursday morning, everything changed again. The cafe was still closed when Grace arrived, arms full of fresh muffins and a new blend of coffee beans she couldn't wait to try. She walked inside, humming softly, set the box on the counter, and stopped. There was a single rose on table 5. No note, just the rose. She smiled. Nathan. Probably some cheesy, sweet surprise to start the morning. She walked behind the counter, reached for the sugar jar to prep the coffee station, and froze. Inside the jar, nestled beneath a folded napkin, was a small velvet box. Her breath caught. She lifted it out carefully, as if the moment might shatter in her hands. Opened it. Inside, a simple gold ring shimmered in the soft morning light. No diamonds, no flash. Just warmth. Just meaning. She didn't hear Nathan walk in until he cleared his throat softly behind her. She turned slowly, heart racing. He was standing at the threshold, still in jeans and a worn sweater, his hands in his pockets, his smile nervous. "That's not where most people keep rings," Grace said, her voice uneven. Nathan grinned. "You love coffee more than flowers. Figured I'd meet you where you live." She looked down at the ring again. Is it what I think it is?" He stepped closer. "It is, but not in the way you expect." Grace blinked. Nathan took her hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now. I know we're still building this, us, this place, this life." She nodded slowly, watching him. "But I want you to know I'm in it. All the way. I'm not going anywhere, and I don't want you to wonder if I will." Grace swallowed hard. "So this is a promise," he said. "Not a deadline, not pressure, just something you can hold on to when the world gets loud." She looked at the ring again, then back at him. "I've never had something like this," she whispered. "Something that was just for me." Nathan lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles. "You deserve everything, Grace. Not just this ring, a lifetime of mornings like this." She didn't cry. but she held the ring like it was the softest, strongest thing she'd ever known. Then slowly she slid it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. They didn't tell anyone right away. It wasn't a secret, it was just theirs, a quiet, sacred kind of joy. But joy, as life has taught her, never comes without its shadows. Later that week, just as the cafe reached its stride and Grace was learning how to truly smile again, a letter arrived. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No words, just a photo of Nathan and a woman Grace didn't recognize. Their hands entwined, their lips dangerously close. And the date in the corner? Just 6 months before she met him. Grace stared at the photo. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the edges. Like holding it more gently would soften the ache it was meant to cause. Nathan, his arm around a woman, their heads tilted together. A closeness you didn't fake. Grace turned the paper over. Nothing. No message. No name. Just the photo and the date, 6 months before they met. She sat down slowly at the small table near the kitchen, the same table where Nathan had once placed a coffee mug with her name written in foam. The ring he'd given her still shimmered on her hand, warm against her skin, but her heart felt suddenly cold. Nathan walked into the cafe 15 minutes later, whistling softly, holding a brown paper bag with 2 buttery croissants. He stopped when he saw her face. Grace? She didn't say anything, just handed him the envelope. He opened it, looked at the photo, then froze. She watched his face carefully. No guilt, no fear, just recognition and regret. Her name's Lauren, Nathan said quietly. Grace raised an eyebrow. Ex-girlfriend? More complicated than that. Grace folded her arms. Nathan sat across from her, setting the croissants aside like they no longer mattered. We were together for a little while. Nothing serious at first, but she had her own reasons. She was trying to marry into money. I didn't see it right away. He hesitated. I was lonely. It wasn't love. It just felt like a placeholder. Grace flinched. You were with her right before we met? He nodded. Yes, but I ended it long before I ever walked into that cafe. I haven't spoken to her since. Grace's voice was quiet but steady. Then why send this now? Nathan looked at her. Because someone wants to stir doubt. Probably her. She hated not getting what she wanted. Which was, he answered without hesitation, control and money. Grace looked down at the ring on her finger. This is real to me, she said softly. It's real to me, too. Then why didn't you tell me? Nathan exhaled. Because it didn't feel relevant, and maybe that was wrong. But I never wanted our beginning to be haunted by something that never really mattered. Grace sat in silence for a moment. It matters now. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What do you want to do? She looked up. I want to trust you. His shoulders dropped, like he'd been holding his breath. But I also want you to promise me, she said. No more surprises. No ghosts in closets. No silence where there should be truth. Nathan reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. I promise, from now on, you get all of me, even the messy parts. Grace studied him for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. I guess love doesn't come without history. Nathan smiled softly. But it does come with croissants. She laughed, despite herself. And they sat there, eating flaky pastry and sipping lukewarm coffee, rebuilding something that had started with a mistaken hug and now stood taller than the lies that once tried to tear it apart. It started with laughter. One quiet Sunday morning, they were curled up on the cafe's back patio, Grace in Nathan's hoodie, Nathan with flour on his cheek from a failed scone attempt. The city moved slowly around them, for once giving them space to dream without interruption. We should add a breakfast nook, Grace said, sketching with a dull pencil on a napkin. Something cozy, near the windows. Nathan leaned over her shoulder. With bookshelves? She smiled. And a little couch, one of those old ones that creaks when you sit. A place for the regulars to fall asleep mid-coffee. Exactly. He kissed the side of her head. Let's do it. And just like that, the future began to take shape, not just the cafe's future, but theirs. That night, while closing the register, Nathan paused. Grace? She looked up, tying her apron. I've been thinking, maybe it's time we find a place, she blinked. A place? Together, not an apartment with bad heating, not a penthouse with too many echoes. Just something real. Grace felt her heart stutter. Nathan, are you sure? He nodded. I want morning coffee and burnt toast with you. Every day. Her chest tightened, but in a good way. Okay, let's look. It wasn't a proposal, it didn't need to be. It was something more solid, more ordinary. The promise of sharing dishes and laundry and quiet Sundays. It was life, and Grace had never wanted anything more. The next morning, she woke up dizzy. She brushed it off, just tired, maybe dehydrated. She skipped breakfast, opened the cafe early, powered through the first rush. But by noon, she was sitting on a crate in the stockroom, gripping the edge of the shelf to keep the room from spinning. Nathan found her minutes later. Grace? She looked up at him with pale cheeks and trembling hands. I don't know what's wrong, she whispered. He was already helping her to her feet. We're going to the clinic. Now. They ran tests. Grace lay on the exam table, cold hands folded over her stomach, Nathan pacing the corner of the room. The doctor entered with a clipboard, smiling gently. Well, she said, I have some news. Grace sat up slowly. You're pregnant. Time stopped. Grace blinked. What? The doctor nodded. About 6 weeks. Grace looked at Nathan. He had gone completely still. Not shocked, not terrified, just still. The doctor gave them a moment alone and quietly stepped out. Nathan sat down beside her, his hand finding hers without hesitation. Grace, he said softly. Her voice shook. I don't know what to say. He smiled, a little broken, a little stunned. Then let me go first. She nodded. I didn't plan this, he said, and I know you didn't either. But when I look at you right now, I don't feel fear. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I feel awe, he whispered. She let out a breath, and for the first time in hours, it wasn't shaky. But this changes everything, she said. The cafe, the house, us. Nathan brought her hand to his lips. Then we build a new everything. Grace had always imagined motherhood in soft frames, warm light, a cradle by the window, lullabies she didn't know the words to but would hum anyway. But now the image came with nausea, swollen ankles, and the terrifying realization that everything she thought she was building had to shift. Just when she had started to feel steady, life had changed the map again. And yet, it didn't feel wrong, just unfamiliar. Nathan was different too, more attentive, not in a grand, sweeping way, but in 1,000 small ones. He'd pack snacks in her purse without her knowing. He'd place a pillow behind her back when she sat for too long at the cafe counter. He started reading baby books when he thought she was asleep, his brows furrowed in concentration, like it was a boardroom strategy. One afternoon, Grace came home after a checkup and found him in the spare bedroom of his apartment, crouched in front of a pile of boxes. She paused in the doorway. What are you doing? He looked up sheepishly, trying to build a crib without instructions. She stared at him. You're building a crib? He stood, brushing sawdust from his hands. I thought we'd need one. You thought we'd need one? She echoed, stunned. He stepped closer. Grace, I've built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals. But this is the only thing I've ever really wanted to get right. Tears welled in her eyes. Then you better read the instructions, she said, her voice cracking. Because I want to get it right too. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Grace had rough mornings, moments of panic, nights where she lay awake wondering if she could balance a business, a baby, and a man who had already given her more than she knew how to hold. There were arguments over little things, paint colors for the nursery, how many hours she should be on her feet at the cafe, whether or not Nathan should hire a private nurse just in case. But they always found their way back. One night she broke down in the middle of folding tiny baby clothes, overwhelmed. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice catching. What if I'm not enough? Nathan knelt in front of her, gently taking her face in his hands. You've been enough since the first time you hugged me by mistake, he said softly. And you're not alone anymore. You never will be. A few weeks later, the cafe hosted a quiet celebration. Nothing extravagant, just family, friends, and customers who had become part of their story. A baby brunch, as Liam called it, complete with pink lemonade, vanilla cake, and a onesie-shaped piñata that Nathan refused to hit. Grace looked around at the mismatched decorations, the laughter, the warmth. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was chasing something. She felt like she was home. That night, Nathan placed his hand on her small but growing bump and whispered, "We don't know what life will throw at us, but this is the best thing I've ever been part of." Grace closed her eyes and whispered, "Me too." It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Grace had just closed the cafe, her belly stretching beneath her soft knit sweater, her hands gently pressed against her lower back as she wiped the last table down. Nathan was late. He'd gotten caught in a meeting, but she didn't mind. She loved this place when it was empty, when it echoed only with memories and dreams. She was humming under her breath when the pain hit. Sharp, sudden. She dropped the cloth. It hit the floor at the same moment she doubled over, one hand clutching the side of a chair. Another wave, deeper, tighter, the kind that stole your breath before you could remember how to ask for help. She managed to reach her phone, but her fingers were trembling so badly that she couldn't even unlock the screen. Then she heard the bell over the cafe door chime. "Grace?" Nathan's voice clear and calm, but when he saw her hunched over behind the counter, everything changed. He was at her side in seconds. She could barely speak. "Something's wrong." Nathan dropped to his knees. Okay, it's early, but not by much. We're okay. We're going to the hospital now." He scooped her up in his arms. No hesitation, no panic in his hands, only urgency in his heart. The city outside didn't matter. The traffic, the sirens, the chaos, only her, only them. The hours that followed were a blur. White walls, machines, nurses moving quickly, a doctor with a calm voice who kept saying words like early labor and we'll monitor her. Grace tried to stay still, but fear crawled up her spine like a shadow she couldn't shake. "I'm not ready," she whispered to Nathan through clenched teeth, her fingers wrapped around his like a lifeline. "It's too soon." Nathan kissed her forehead. "You're ready. You've been ready since the day you faced life alone and still chose to love." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "I'm scared." He held her tighter. "I'm here," he whispered. "No matter what, you're not doing this alone." When the baby finally arrived, a little girl, red-faced and squalling, Grace didn't cry. Not at first. She was too stunned, too exhausted. But when they laid the baby in her arms, when she saw Nathan's tears fall freely onto their daughter's tiny hand, she broke. Tears spilled over her cheeks, and she laughed, half joy. "She's here," she whispered. Nathan nodded, resting his forehead gently against hers. "She's perfect." They named her Clara Joy after Grace's mother, and because that's what she brought the moment she entered their world. Joy. Pure, untamed, healing joy. Nathan held her that night in the hospital room, swaying gently by the window while Grace dozed, her hand still curled around the sleeve of his shirt. He looked down at his daughter, a miracle he never knew he needed. And then at Grace, the woman who had changed him, not with wealth, not with influence, but with heart, honesty, and a love so powerful it rewrote his soul. "I promise you," he whispered to them both, "you'll never doubt how deeply you're loved." The world changed in quiet ways after Clara's arrival. Morning started earlier, sometimes before the sun, with soft cries and tiny fists waving in the air. The cafe still opened at 8, but now there was a bassinet behind the counter, and Grace took orders with a sleepy smile and a burp cloth slung over her shoulder. Nathan adjusted too. His phone buzzed less during dinners and more during diaper changes. His calendar still filled with meetings, but now every entry ended with, "Home by 5. He had gone from billion-dollar mergers to learning the difference between formula brands, and he never once looked back. One rainy afternoon, Grace stood at the cafe window holding Clara, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember when this place was just dust and broken tile?" she asked softly. "And you threatened to throw a hammer at me if I picked the wrong floorboards?" he teased. She laughed. "You did pick the wrong ones. Only because I wanted to see you get riled up." She turned in his arms. "You really had no idea what you were doing, did you?" "Not a clue," he said. "Still don't. But I know one thing, I'd rather fail 1,000 times next to you than succeed alone." Grace leaned into him, the weight of Clara between them like a promise. They stood there for a while, three hearts beating in harmony, the storm outside forgotten. The cafe became more than just a business. It became a place where people lingered longer, where stories were shared between strangers, where Grace hosted single moms brunches, where Nathan set up a tiny library corner filled with children's books, and Liam, now in college, tutored kids for free in the back room on Saturdays. Sunridge Cafe had become the soul of the neighborhood again. And in every way that mattered, Grace had built her parents' dream and her own. One evening, Nathan surprised her. He dimmed the lights in the cafe, lit a dozen candles, and played their favorite jazz record from the old turntable they kept behind the bar. Clara was asleep upstairs with Liam. The tables were empty, the coffee machines off. Just them. Nathan took her hand and led her to the center of the cafe floor. "Dance with me," he said. Grace smiled, rested her head on his chest. "You know, I never believed in fate," she whispered. "Me either. But then I hugged the wrong man in an airport." He pulled her closer, and he never wanted to let go. They swayed to the music. Two souls who had walked through storms, stitched together not by perfection, but by forgiveness, trust, and an unshakable love that had grown in unexpected soil. As the song played on, Nathan leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Let's grow old here," he whispered. And Grace, eyes closed, heart full, answered with a smile. "We already are." Epilogue. The Last Cup. Years later, a new couple would walk into Sunridge Cafe, awning, just passing through. They'd sit near the window, order 2 cappuccinos, and ask the woman behind the counter if this was a franchise or something. Grace, now with a few silver strands in her hair and laugh lines in the corners of her eyes, would just smile. "No," she'd say, "just a little place built from a mistake that turned out to be the best decision of my life." And across the room, Nathan, still sharp, still watching her like she was the sun, would raise his cup in a silent toast. Because love, when it's real, doesn't fade. It just brews stronger over time.